Speaking of Pianists by Abram Chasins, published by Alfred A. Knopf, New York, 1957, narrated by Penny Johnson. Development. Ignace Jan Paderewski. It was after the First World War at a conference of the League of Nations that Paderewski and Georges Clemenceau met for the first time. "You are Monsieur Paderewski, the great pianist?" asked Clemenceau. Paderewski responded with a modest and courtly bow. "And now," continued Clemenceau, "you are the Premier of Poland." Again Paderewski bowed. My," said Clemenceau with a deep sigh. "What a come-down." Although the tiger of France was bantering, he could be said to have overlooked the crux of Paderewski's triumphant career. Had Paderewski been just a pianist, he never could have been the musician or the man he was, nor could he have aroused the frenzied adulation of his vast and international public. Apart from his piano playing, this patriotic and glamorous Pole was a world citizen. To everything and everybody he brought a princely manner, a beautifully trained mind, and a broadly humanized heart. Paderewski had all the ingredients of a public idol. No one found it possible to be coolly objective about him. No one ever said that he was merely a good pianist or a nice man. He stimulated either slavish devotion or bitter antagonism. The American critic Henry T. Fink, who wrote of Paderewski as of a deity, once added a nervous and revealing footnote addressed to piano students. "If your teacher sneers at Paderewski, leave him at once." When someone raved to the pianist Alfred Reisenauer about Paderewski's remarkable versatility in general culture, his ability to converse brilliantly on any subject and in any language, Reisenauer said, "Oh yes, Paderewski knows everything, except music." Clearly there was no middle ground. People either worshipped Paderewski or dismissed him as a musical charlatan. I became one of the worshippers, but not immediately, and not at one of his concerts. I first heard him when I was a tot, and the experience meant nothing at all to me. Again I heard him when I was 11, and though I was still too young to appreciate the man's art, I do recall fully appreciating the hysteria it evoked and being swept along in the mad enthusiasm. A few years later, I was invited by Ernest Erx, an executive of Steinway & Sons, to play the traditional Wagner and Mendelssohn marches at his daughter's wedding. It was a brilliant occasion, and almost every pianist of note was there. I thought that everyone had arrived, and I was seated at the piano waiting for a signal to begin. Suddenly I heard a stir, felt something electric in the atmosphere, and noticed every eye riveted on something behind me. Turning around quickly, I saw Paderewski standing in the doorway. I shall never forget that leonine authority, that quiet dignity and regal poise. The way this man's presence illuminated that room, crowded with his most celebrated colleagues, as though a blinding light had been turned on. Immediately after the ceremony, the happy throng besieged the bridal party. Before I had a chance to rise from the piano bench, Paderewski came right over, bent, and kissed me on the forehead and said, "You played beautifully. I am deeply moved. Thank you, dear boy." What courtliness! The sanctified spot remained unwashed for a week, and but for parental pressure would have stayed that way indefinitely. I shall never forget him, never stop loving that generous soul. That was the man's overwhelming power, and it poured into everything he played. Paderewski generated that same quality from platforms to hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions, who never met him. Attending a Paderewski concert was a human rather than a musical experience. One felt like an invited guest at a palace soirée. Paderewski was the gallant host. He greeted you with regal grace. You, in turn, were caught up in a collective passion for this captivating personality who brought glory not only to himself, but also to all who paid him homage. There were few present who were not mesmerized long before Paderewski placed a finger on the keyboard. But this is not the whole story. Paderewski was never the pianist's pianist. His colleagues were too busy counting his clinkers and ridiculing his old-school exaggerations to catch Paderewski's world spirit. Moreover, a sorcerer who hypnotized his audiences, a hero whose reddish golden locks were snipped by beautiful women and publicized like a patent medicine, a knight in shining armor who rode forth in a special railroad car built according to his own design and appointed with kingly splendor, complete to grand piano, tuner, valet, secretary, and chef, such a man was bound to predispose many against his flamboyant victories. What kind of pianist was Paderewski? It is a good question, and RCA Victor enabled us to answer it more objectively by issuing in 1956 The Art of Paderewski on an LP Camden disc containing 14 performances recorded late in Paderewski's career. Chopin, Schumann, and Beethoven provided the bulk of Paderewski's repertory, and all are represented here. 5 Chopin works immediately demonstrate Paderewski's primary musical and pianistic characteristics. In the revolutionary etude, Paderewski's grandiloquent romanticism serves the heroic sweep of this classic admirably. The playing has irresistible vitality, momentum, and eloquence. The pianist who could play this way had a rich imagination, could think for himself, and make things come out his way. The A-flat prelude, C-sharp minor waltz, and the etude in the same key from Opus 25 all emerge as examples of old-fashioned playing with its best and worst features. Largesse, warmth, and the power of evocation are apparent throughout, and so are rhythmic distortion and maudlin sentimentalities that loom today as tasteless theatricalities. The Black Key etude is heard at practice tempo. It is an attempt at a virtuoso piece by a man no longer a virtuoso, by a man, we ought to remember, who had sacrificed years of daily practice to found a republic, no less. Schumann's Warum discloses Paderewski's beautiful tone and poetic feeling. It also discloses the unhappy traits of melodramatic expressivity. The agonized cantilena, the torn to tatters meter, the hands played one before the other. The first movement of Beethoven's Sonata, Opus 27, number 2, is tonally luscious, and the treatment of the left hand is especially sensitive and meaningful. Yet again there is present no small violation of sentiment and simplicity. Stoyavsky's By the Brookside is completely authoritative and beautifully played, full of freshness and flow, as is Liszt's F minor concert etude with a voluptuously enchanting coda by Leschetizky. Debussy's Mistral finds Paderewski on unfamiliar ground. It is not his kind of piece. He labors over it and misses its humor and implications. Although stylistically not much more authentic, his performances of 2 pieces by an earlier French master, Couperin's La Bandoline and Le Carillon, are touchingly tender. Paderewski's playing at its best was a dream of noble unity and tonal beauty. These attributes are most convincingly displayed here, complete with old master effects in a moving performance of his own Nocturne in B-flat. Such quiet fervor and such gentle urgency are indeed rare. Here, then, are the sounds of Paderewski. Musically and instrumentally, they are reliable replicas of his playing when he was no longer in his prime. But the most important element is absent. Paderewski was the kind of pianist whose inspiring presence was essential to a fully realized communication of his art. So, I imagine, was Liszt. Such magnetism is not to be shrugged off. It is an elusive and unique power given to few, and it goes into the making of music as well as into the making of a career. It is not always artistic excellence that carries us out of ourselves, that makes us know we have experienced something, that something deep within us has been stirred. If, as Duse said, art is the communication of ecstasy, Paderewski was a supreme artist. but he and you had to be at the same place at the same time for the communion to cast its spell.